I'm joined by the chair of the British Youth Council, Amanda Chetwynd-Cowieson, Yahya Miah, who is a sixth form pupil at Bolingbroke Academy in southwest London, youth worker Dami Olorunnisomo, and Kat Smith, Shadow Minister for Voter Engagement and Young People. Very good evening to you all. Now, so much to talk about, and on so many fronts, the outlook is fairly bleak for Generation C, Generation COVID, if we can call you that. Let's start with you, Amanda, and talk about education. Good education is, of course, the gateway to a future. Just tell us about your fears.
I think overall, one of my main fears around education and young people is the complete and utter lack of a plan about what to do. It's been over 80 days since schools in England were closed, and there's just so many opportunities for the government to have really listened to young people, to teachers and to institutions, to actually make sure that young people are involved in the planning of how to bring education back safely, because we all know, it's quite well documented, that if that isn't done, it's going to be the people from the most deprived backgrounds who really feel the effects of this for the longest. And I think it's just absolutely unacceptable that the government haven't even produced a contingency plan for what happened if they weren't able to open schools. They've had plenty of time to do that. They knew that was always a possibility the moment they closed schools. So I think there's a real fear here that actually it's going to be the children from the most difficult backgrounds who get properly left behind for a long, long time, many, many years to catch up again.
Yeah, and just stay with you, Amanda, the issue of universities as well, those that want to go there and those that are already there missed quite a lot of teaching.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, that's another element where what we really needed was a clear bit of leadership from the government. There's been no kind of advice to the sector as a whole to handle even the most basic of issues. The fact that many university students were paying rent in a house that they actually literally could not move into. They had to pay rent in halls. There was no guarantees around contextual applications for people who have just finished school and going to university. So, again, the one thing for me that really stands out here is the complete and utter lack of any planning from the government to make sure that it's not pupils from the most deprived families that get left behind in the long term.
Yahya, let's hear from you, because we saw you talking to Inzamam there about, well, you should still be at school. You should be doing your A-levels, shouldn't you? Just about coming to the end of them, or maybe have finished them. Of course, you're not. Just tell us about your experience over the last 3 months.
Well, the experience has been difficult over the last 3 months because, of course, you're always used to waking up in the morning, following the same routine, having breakfast, going to school, meeting your friends and your teachers. But it's been a complete drastic change of like tides almost. And teachers have, like at our Bolingbroke Academy, have had a huge impact on that. They've changed lessons online. I've had a lot of pastoral care with teachers visiting, dropping food packages. It's been utterly amazing. And at the same time, it's been extremely difficult because the events of Corona are so unpredictable. So you're not sure how much you need to work, how much you need to focus on your studies for uni. And it's just that unpredictability, which is the largest fear at the moment within these last 3 months.
And just tell us again about your ambitions, what you want to study and where.
I'd like to study geography with a year abroad at either Bristol or Queen Mary's University. Of course, a big part of that is that it has a year abroad, which is the biggest uncertainty once again, because you don't know what's going to happen with that year abroad. And one of the main things which made me want to choose that is sort of learning about the world, learning about people, and the sort of systems and flows around that. And now Corona has hit. You know, you're not sure what to study. I'm not sure whether to read ahead. It's a very confusing time for me.
OK, well, let's talk to you, Dami, as a youth worker, and Amanda was mentioning there, a lot of people you work with were already struggling educationally before this.
Yeah, I think exams are a very difficult time for young people all across the country, all across the globe. And to have, obviously, you basically prepare for them the majority of your life as a young person when you're in school. Everything sort of builds up to this time period where you have to obviously do your exams. And so for you to have to cancel your exams for a global pandemic, so not only is your future under scrutiny, your exams as well, that is what you're aiming for as a young person. That's the ultimate goal that you're trying to achieve. And for that to be thrown basically out the window and not being sure about the grades you're going to get, how you're going to get them, it's a scary time for a lot of young people. It's difficult for them to be able to handle that, especially when a lot of young people are waiting and waiting for the exams to maybe boost their grades up a little bit more, work a little bit harder. And maybe their schoolwork hasn't been able to get them the grades that they need to get into their universities or the colleges that they're trying to get into.
And let me ask you a specific question. We knew before this about exclusion from schools and how damaging that can be. Well, in a sense, everyone's been excluded. Is that, you think, further down the line going to cause a lot of problems?
Yeah, I think it's it's challenged young people to sort of take ownership of their learning, which for some young people has been really difficult. Some young people really require the change of setting, the environments, the support of the teachers and the people in the community around them to basically help them get through studying and focusing. And so with everyone obviously not being in that setting, not having that same sort of flow, the pattern routine that you're used to, it's very easy for you to fall off and slack. It's very easy for you not to finish the module that you have to complete. And it's difficult for teachers, especially to be able to enforce some of the stuff that they're trying to teach. It's difficult for them to get the same expression, see if a young person needs an extra support, extra motivation. It's hard for everybody in sort of the education and the support sectors to be able to help young people in that way. It's even more difficult for them to internally motivate themselves to do that, especially when they have no sort of support or enforcement, basically.
Cat Smith, give us the politicians' view. Now, we heard Amanda there crying out for a plan for young people's education. Why don't you get together? Why isn't there a kind of government of all the talents, a committee of all the talents to work something out?
Well, I thought what Amanda said, I mean, I couldn't disagree with anything that she said. I thought the points that she raised, and actually the other panellists as well, have absolutely raised the issue. And I think that already this discussion has got into a broader space than we often get into when we're politicians being interviewed on programmes like your own, if I might say, about the issues about education, which is beyond education. So the issues around the way in which exams, graduation, school leaving, completing apprenticeships really punctuate a young person's life and help them to build onto the next stage. And all of that has been ripped apart. So I do think that there needs to be a plan from government, but I think it needs to be a plan that looks beyond education and a plan that actually looks at young people as a whole.
But just sorry to interrupt, Cat Smith, but, you know, it's the urgency of it all. We need the plan now.
Absolutely, but that plan has to be a plan that can work. And all the way through, Labour has tried to be a constructive opposition. We have always managed to highlight the issues and the potential pitfalls that a government might be about to walk into. And that's the role that we play. So I've already called on the government to take that approach, to make sure that young people are being looked at in a very holistic way, that we're not just talking about how do we get schools open, but actually how do we bring in the extra mental health support that we know young people are going to need when they get back into those schools? How do we actually rebuild the youth work sector, which has been decimated for this government, to give that wraparound support outside of the school environment? Because if you don't look at young people as a whole, I just don't think you're going to solve crisis that this generation's facing.
I think we pretty much know the questions. We haven't got a lot of answers yet. But Yahya, I want to ask you, do you feel that your generation are just being overlooked by the politicians? You aren't part of the planning?
I wouldn't particularly say we're being overlooked, but I definitely think there's not the attention that's there and that's supposed to be shown. You know, it all, like she said, it all starts in the youth centres, the youth clubs. In my local area, there's a place called Carney's Community, which is a small boxing club, which help youth and young children like me out of sort of estate places and really gets them to be a part of a family and things like that. And I think it's really important to have that support there. And I think especially in this time where places like that are closed and there's not enough support being shown to children like of my generation especially, it really affects stuff like mental health and sort of physical well-being too with the sport like boxing.
Dami, you see the damage that a sense of alienation can cause to society. Young people who feel, well, this society doesn't speak for me, it doesn't represent me, my needs or my beliefs. Could this only make it worse?
Yeah, 100%. I think disillusionment and distrust with the government and the authorities and people that are around us really affects young people. I think when we start to distrust the people that are meant to support us and care for us, it becomes very difficult for us. That's where you start to see young people start to potentially act out or behave antisocially. I don't think that it's easy for young people to be in the situation, and obviously without any proper support and any care and any thought given by governments, it's difficult for the public sector, the youth sector, to really support and care for young people and carry this weight.
Well, let's move on now and join it up, and Amanda, move on into the world of work, employment, and I suppose let's talk, because we haven't got an unlimited amount of time, the two forms of work, the forms of work that a lot of young people will do to fund them during their education. A lot of those jobs just gone or will be gone. And then those first steps on the ladder of employment, of valued and valuable employment. Tell us your thoughts, Amanda.
So I guess, kind of like you said, it's kind of twofold. The first one is that I don't think there's been a real appreciation of how much students and potentially people in college, etc., really depend on the retail and the hospitality sector for that first job, and often actually for that first bit of kind of independence and financial security. And I appreciate there's been a lot of conversations around jobs being lost, but there's not really been a focus on what age group is going to mostly lose out from that, and it is kind of young people in particular. But on the second point, again, around the kind of entry-level jobs, there has just been no planning from this government. I've not seen anything from them around how they intend to really dramatically drive up the number of supported apprenticeships they're going to do, and how you can really incentivise different organisations and businesses to make sure that actually those apprenticeships are offered to people from areas, higher level of deprivation areas. There's been no kind of real conversations around what's happened to any of the people who have already had their apprenticeships cancelled. I've met some members from the British Youth Council who were supposed to start apprenticeships in the next couple of months, and in September those apprenticeships have been cancelled, and they've been told hopefully your university can make it work and you'll lose that year in industry and you can just deal with the modules that are there. And that's not really what these people signed up for. And again, it's taking away that agency from young people's lives, where actually they're making decisions about what they want to do with their employment and with your career.
Sorry, I've just got to butt in, Amanda, and ask you, I mean, you are on the British Youth Council. Are you not being consulted? I mean, surely your voice in the very heart of government is essential.
So I think it's actually been really interesting for me about who has and who hasn't reached out to BYC and to other organisations for consultation. The Bank of England, over 900 young people worked with our Bank of England Youth Forum to give their experiences and their economic concerns relating to COVID directly to the chief economist. It's not hard. If something as old and institutional as the Bank of England can consult young people on their economic concerns from COVID, I refuse to believe that Department for Education, DCMS, and all other departments from the government can't consult young people. But we've been advocating and trying and doing our best to get in there, and it's kind of just waiting for the other side to come to the table and say, let's actually talk to young people and let's find out what they really want and what they're going to need to really succeed and not get left behind over the next few years.
Yahya, just tell us about the number of jobs that you were doing. We saw in Inzamam's report there that you've been highly productive.
I was doing 3 jobs in order to support my family. The main job, which was me working at a bread stall, a little store on the side of Northcote Road, selling food to people. And before coronavirus and the lockdown rules applied, I was working babysitting with kids in the area, and also a place called Flip Out, which is a little trampoline place for like sort of kids too. And it was really helping my family. And obviously with me now not being able to work those 2 other jobs, and only being able to work bread stall and that one sole job, and obviously my brother's being furloughed, it really does affect my family, and it really does affect the income which comes in and out, really. And
career-wise, you mentioned you want to study geography. What would you ideally like to go on to do?
I'm not sure. I don't think.
Good.
I think it's a good thing being unsure, and I'd like to see where it takes me, and I'd like to see where I'd go with it. However, it's something I was interested in and something which I hope leads me to great places.
Yeah, fair play to you. Dami, the question is, if there clearly aren't high quality or decent jobs, let's just stick with that, decent jobs, fairly well-paid jobs around for young people, well, then there's some of them are going to try and find money elsewhere.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It's difficult to tell a young person to go and work for £5 an hour, because as you saw with Yahya's situation, it's difficult to support your family in that way. However, I wouldn't count all young people. I believe that as a group of young people, and someone young myself, we're resilient. We are going to try our best to not just obviously turn to the typical avenues that we'll see and our advertiser at young people, but we'll try and find our ways to best support ourselves within the means that we have already. But I do believe for a lot of young people, it may be challenging to see a way out. Working at a low-paying retail job or low-paying job that you don't necessarily enjoy, that isn't in your sector, can be very difficult to handle and to bear with, which is why some people get into avenues that we don't want to see them in.
And Cat Smith, that leads us to then the quality of the jobs. Whatever schemes are put in place, they have to be proper schemes, not like some of them that were around in the 1980s. Proper training, proper apprenticeships, properly paid, and leading then to something real.
Absolutely. And young people's wages were already stagnating before the coronavirus crisis. And this crisis now is only looking to make things much worse for their generation. You know, just since coronavirus, we've seen that, particularly amongst 18 to 24-year-olds, wages absolutely plummeting. And I think
well, I'm afraid Cat Smith seems to have frozen there, in the sense that we've lost the sound from her. I tell you what, we'll go to a break now, and we'll hear more from Cat Smith and indeed all our panellists when we come back. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Well, we're discussing the prospects for young people after this pandemic. And just before the break, you may have seen the link went down to Cat Smith, Labour's Cat Smith, and we were discussing jobs, the jobs market for young people, how they've got to be proper jobs.
Sorry you lost me there, Dermot. Maybe there's a job of work that can be done improving internet in Lancashire. The point I was ending on, which was we can learn a lot from the 2008 financial crisis. What we learned from that it was non-graduates who had just left full-time education that were most severely impacted by the financial crisis in 2008. We know that the coronavirus crisis is going to be very similar, and if anything, worse. So the government should be focusing efforts on reaching out to school leavers and people that have left education but not necessarily graduates. They are going to be the cohort that will need the most support from government to bring in proper jobs, proper apprenticeships, to make sure that they're not forgotten.
OK, well, let's move on now to, I suppose, an intangible life experiences. And Yahya, I want to talk to you about that first of all. We mentioned there you're not doing your A-levels. They're going to be sent to you in August with the grades. You're going to get them. So, I mean, when it first was announced, did you think, wow, great, I don't have to sit all those exams? Or do you now feel you're missing out on what's called a rite of passage, put in that huge amount of effort, and then you're free to celebrate for a bit?
Honestly, I was very disappointed that exams were cancelled, because as sort of like people say and teachers say, those last 4 months are the most important months where a kid, and especially boys in this sense, will really grind out and try to get the best grades they possibly can. With me working hard those 2 years and then finding out that the end result is cancelled, it does put fear into you that the end product will be a simple calculated grade, really. And with the second thing you asked about, that sort of social aspect, in the come up of the 2 years, we had a little prefect group, and we were planning a leavers ball towards the end of the year, sort of a celebration to wrap up the last 2 years of hard work. And with that now being cancelled, it's obviously hard to find new ways where we can find a celebration, where we can maybe hang out with each other. However, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. There are still positives about it. I do still have, for example, FaceTime calls with my mates, with my girlfriend, where we learn new hobbies, learn to do new things. So I think although this is a negative situation, there are still many positives to take out of it.
Great to hear that. Yeah, glass half full man there. But Dami, you know, whether or not you're leaving school, going to university or whatever, it's summer, for goodness sake. And for young people, there's no going round people's houses, no hanging out together. Well, there probably is, but not officially. And there certainly aren't things like festivals and the rest of it. These important experiences.
Yeah, definitely. I know a lot of my friends, a lot of people are looking forward to events like Wireless, Afro Nation, Notting Hill Carnival, and obviously not being able to experience these things puts a real downer on yourself. I think the time when you finish school, you've done exams, you have that summer holidays, often some of the best times that young people have. They're relatively stress-free. For a lot of people, they're going to apply for jobs for the first time, they're getting their first job. There's a lot of buzz and excitement about the experiences you're going to have during this time. And it's very difficult for a young person to obviously to basically have that same amount of time, if not more, and not be able to do anything, not being able to socialize, not being able to go out, not being able to enjoy and spend time with each other, especially after you've grinded for essentially a very long time.
And Amanda, let's talk about mental health, because I suspect an awful lot of young people aren't as robust on that front as you all seem to be. There's a danger, isn't there, with all this isolation, frustration, etc. There could be some awful problems building up behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was really quite stark for me when I kind of a while ago saw the research from Young Minds that said 51% of the people that they had filled out this research for them, they felt that COVID-19 had actually made their mental health worse. And for just over 30%, it had made it a significant amount worse. And I think one of the big kind of problems that's coming around the corner is that a lot of mental health situations get picked up in that educational environment, whether that's at university, school, college, or even primary school. And unless the funding and the resources are really kind of ramped up for when people are eventually allowed back to school, those services that are already really stretched are just going to be completely overwhelmed. And that's another area where I just think actually what young people probably need to hear, and what particularly parents need to hear as well, is that the government are being proactive about what it's going to look like in September and how they are going to help families and young people really digest the amount of change and uncertainty that they've had to live through recently. But we've not seen any of that, and I hope that that's coming, and I'll be pleasantly surprised. But I do think we maybe underestimate how many of those issues get picked up in an educational setting.
And as you say, something the government should be discussing. We did ask people on from the Department for Education, but they weren't able to furnish a minister for us this evening. But Cat Smith from Labour is here. And just take that on board. We've been talking about the problems forming relationships, the life experiences that young people are missing, and, of course, the mental health damage.
Absolutely. And in addition to that mental health point, I would just like to make a point that's not been made yet, which is for a lot of young people, lockdown may have been locked down in somewhere that's not safe. So they may have been locked down in a home where there is violence or abuse, and they're unable to access the perhaps usual channels of support that they were using. In addition to that, of course, it might be the first time a young person has experienced loss of a close family member. And given the situation we've had with limited numbers at funerals, that young person might not have had the opportunity to attend a funeral and be able to say goodbye and get closure in that sense. So when we come out of lockdown, I think it's important that the child and adolescent mental health services that have been so woefully underfunded for the past decade actually that and really fund that service make sure.
I'm terribly sorry, Cat Smith, I'm terribly sorry. We are out of time. May I genuinely say the best of luck to you all, and thank you so much for speaking to us this evening on Sky News Tonight. An absolutely fascinating discussion.